Up next, we have a chat between UM-based senior reporter extraordinaire, actually, and professional carpet photographer. You may not know that about her, Sara, Brittany, Somerset, and cannabis industry OG, Christine de la Rosa, from the People's Ecosystem, from the People's Group.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's late in the day. It's the third day. We all partied at Soho House last night. We're all a little tired, so thanks for sticking with us. I just want to say thank you so much to the Benzinga team, everybody who worked so hard to put this event together, the Lane brothers, Javier, Chelsea, Kelsey, Sophia, and I want to introduce this powerhouse sitting next to me. If you don't know her, you should. Christine de la Rosa, who in addition to being on the board of directors of the National Cannabis Industry Association, or NCIA, and the chair of the NCIA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, is a managing partner of the People's Group, which is a traditional $50 million fund whose cornerstone investor is the former chief information officer for Sequoia. The fund is run by a majority of women of color and is specifically investing in Black, Indigenous people of color, known collectively as the BIPOC community. Christine, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Sarah Brittany.
So why don't you explain to our keen audience what the People's Group is and why it started the first cannabis DAO, and what is a DAO?
So we're supposed to have slides up here, so I don't know if anybody has figured that out, but so the People's Group, basically I'm an operator. I've been an operator since I was in the legacy market. We transitioned into legal market in 2018, and I started the People's Group to solve the issue that we were having as a mostly BIPOC women-owned company. And if we can get to the next slide, because we don't have a clicker up here. So one of the things that's happened since we started the fund back in August of 2021 and we started to deploy capital is I've spoken to about 120 BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and women-owned companies, about 120 of them in the last 6 months. And we have a very unique thesis, right? It's a very specific thesis. But I was meeting all of these founders that had either really great ideas, were already revenue generating, but just didn't fit our thesis. And so that's when we were starting to think outside of the box. How do we get capital to these founders of color that have really great brands, are really great cultivators, are really just great at what they're doing, but just don't have access to capital, very much like I did not have access to capital. So I'm gonna have them put on the screen the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. I'll give that to you. Do you wanna do that? Yeah. And so we started to look at cryptocurrency, we started to look at the metaverse, we started to look at Web3, and we were thinking, this might be an alternative way for us to get capital to these founders that don't have access to capital. So what is a DAO? A DAO basically is a group of people that have a central, without a central leader or a company, but have come together for a similar purpose. And what we know, and what I know specifically, is that there's a lot of people that want to invest in cannabis. There's a lot of people that don't have access for that investment. They might have people that they want to support specifically. So this allows for us to put those people together in the DAO. It's really simple. It's just built on a blockchain. Smart contracts. So you can have a DAO and say, I want to buy a $1.8 million real estate for this founder who's gotten 3 licenses but doesn't have access to capital to buy that. You're able to do that in a DAO. You put all the capital in, your DAO decides, is this a good investment? And they're able to do that. But unlike REITs or PropCos, which are really specific to accredited investors and to US investors in some cases, this allows for people from all over the world to invest in this real estate. And often the way that members get into a DAO is by purchasing for governance tokens specifically. And these groups, like I said, can made up from all around the world. So what if you are a founder and you have, let's say, 100 funds that are specifically investing in cannabis? You're not probably going to get funded. I can tell you that firsthand. But also, you're really starting to think about what are alternative ways to get capital to those folks. And why it's so important that these founders get capital is because of the change in the population that's happening right now. So 1 in 5 people in the US today is Latinx. And they had a 23 population increase. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So 1 in 7 people are African American. 1 in 14 people are Asian. There's over $3 trillion of buying power in those groups. And for the most part, those groups, including Asian Americans, are really deep into the legacy market. They buy a lot from the legacy market. So when you're thinking about DAOs, you're like, well, if a founder who has an authentic voice of color or women can't get money to bring their brand or their dispensary or their cultivation or their manufacturing of products to the industry, then we are losing out on trillions of dollars of money just because we don't have authentic voice in the industry, but also understanding how funds work and how very narrow those investment theses are. Using the DAOs would be an alternative method. It's not going to replace funds. It's not going to replace angel investors, Reg A, seed rounds. It's just another way to get capital to these founders that haven't had access.
Great explanation. Many institutional investors and CPG bands often miss out entirely on the BIPOC demographic and dismiss it as a minority share of the market. However, you accurately refer to the BIPOC community as the global majority. I think.
Right. We are the global majority across the world.
And in fact, BIPOC millennials make up 40% of the US buying power in the United States. And you mentioned that your ecosystem is 70% BIPOC owned, 70% LGBTQ owned, and 80% BIPOC women owned. So how do investors, high net worth individuals, and family offices provide access to capital to them?
I think that family offices and high net worth individuals and funds have to start thinking about different ways to identify creditworthiness. For many years, creditworthiness was really built on something that was built 80, 100, 200 years ago. The demographics in the US are changing, and the way that you provide creditworthiness for white males is very, very different on how you have to put creditworthiness for people who have been formerly incarcerated, people who are chronically ill veterans. This is really important, especially going into New York, where the first 200 are going to be formerly incarcerated folks. How are you going to plan for the creditworthiness of those folks if you don't understand what your rubric's going to be for that? So what we say to them is start to shift your thinking and figure out other ways in which to understand how to fund these folks and move your rubric that has worked for a certain type of society, which is now shifting, so that you can also expand your own investments and really be able to create more revenue, more generation, revenue for your fund or for your investment than you would if you continue to just invest in the usual suspects.
Now, I'm sure some people are unfamiliar with the term DAO being a decentralized autonomous organization. Mm-hmm. So if you're approaching it from a completely tabula rasa clean slate, how do you understand its workings?
Well, one of the things that we're doing for our DAO, and I think a lot of other DAOs that are not necessarily in the cannabis space do, is that the very first thing we're doing is a membership token. And that membership token isn't into the DAO. The membership token is into the educational platform so that we can teach you about the DAO. And not just the investors, but also the founders, right? How does a DAO work? When you invest in a DAO, how do you get your money out? Is it something that's liquid? Can you take it out whenever you want? We're going to be using an Ethereum platform. What are gas fees? How do I solve for that? What do I need to think about? We're building that right now in the DAO, but in order for us to build that, we need to teach our folks sometimes as basic as how do you get a MetaMask wallet to prepare for this? How do you buy a token for the real estate because you're not really interested in the token for the dispensary? And so having that educational platform is really important.
I agree. What advice would you have to people in the audience who are looking to join a DAO, and why should they join your DAO?
I would say that you should get a membership token. We have a membership NFT. It's called the Chronicles of Mary Jane. It's an entire storyboard, and the first one coming out is Mary Jane, and that gets you to the educational platform where we get to teach you, what is the impact rubric? What is the financial rubric that we're using to identify these founders that we think are going to get a 10x revenue? What are we measuring for, and helping you understand that? I think that's the very first thing.
And explain a little bit about how the DAO is empowering to people who are involved in it.
I think the biggest thing for the DAO is that if you've ever raised capital, it's expensive. It's very expensive to raise capital, and a lot of BIPOC founders and women founders don't have a lot of extra money. So a DAO is actually more, it's not as expensive. There is some fees, so you want to have a lawyer, things like that, but it's not as expensive. So it makes it more accessible to more people. It's really important to understand that when we're looking at capital, we're looking at accessibility to the capital. Everybody has said, especially in the cannabis industry, that is the hardest part, is the accessibility to capital. So DAOs also help you with that, because it's something that you can actually build pretty easily. You don't have to be a developer. One of our partners is Upstream. They just raised $12 million for an entire DAO platform that is just turnkey. So there's a lot of ways in which you can start the DAO. But the thing that's important about the DAO is you have to understand your members of the DAO. You have to understand that community for yourself. You can't just say, I'm going to start a DAO and then just be like, hope people join it. You have to really think about it. Think about how you want it to be formed, how you want to utilize it for either your company or for other companies.
And who is the ideal member of a DAO, and how does the DAO empower communities as a whole?
I think the ideal member of a DAO is somebody who is on the cutting edge with us. And I feel like cannabis investors are sort of set for that, because they're already on the cutting edge. They've already invested in a federally illegal drug and are out here just wilding out at Benzinga, right? So y'all are actually the best group to be in DAOs, right? Or to create DAOs, or to be in a DAO. And I think that what really happens with that is then you have the ability to have investors from all over the world at different levels of expertise. And one of the cool things that I really liked about the DAO is that, everybody has a voting, if that's how you create your DAO, that's how we do, has a voting right. So they can vote. They can be like, oh, I really love this founder. We're going to give her $750,000. We're voting. But you might be like, I really like this person, but I'm not a cannabis expert out of Uruguay. So I believe that this person over here is a cannabis expert. I read his stuff or her stuff on the internet. I feel like they've had successful exits. I'm going to assign my vote to that person. And the cool thing about that is you can assign it or unassign it. So if you say, oh, I don't like the way that they're voting, you can unassign the vote. But it's very much a collective learning on how to invest in cannabis. And that's something that we didn't have. I mean, you can look at all of the things that happened in 2012 to 2014 where people lost their shirt on some of the large MSOs out of Canada because they were thinking it was tech. And what the people on the ground knew was that it's actually a commodity, it's agriculture. So the tech folks were like, well, where's our 10 times exit in 3 years? And we were like, yeah, we can grow 3 crops at this point. So it's about learning together.
So it's community oriented.
It is very community oriented, but it's community and investor oriented. I think that's important.
And how do you bridge that gap between like institutional investors who might not be on the cutting edge of, the alpha community or the Gen X community, or no, so they are Gen X, but who are not, Gen Alpha or millennial or younger millennial, and they're a little bit scared of things that might seem to be, as you said earlier, flying the plane while building it.
I think one of the coolest things about millennials, I know that I have some millennials in the crowd, one of the coolest things, especially around impact investing and the large family offices, is that millennials are actually about to take over the governance of that. So in that way, I think we're just positioned perfectly, because maybe, and I say this all the time, maybe my elder doesn't understand what we're doing right now, but my millennial does. And my millennial is about to start to organize their capital for their family or for a high net worth investor. So I think that it's a one-on-one conversation. It was the same with cannabis, right? When I told my mother I was going to do cannabis, she's like, why are you always shaming the family? Now she packs packages for me. Like, but it was a one-on-one conversation. I think the same happens in the metaverse and in Web3 and in NFTs and in DAOs.
So you see this more as a tech play?
I think it's both. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Do you have any final thoughts for us about your fund?
I think that one of the things about DAOs that people need to start thinking about and start to really evaluate is how that's not something that replaces a fund. It's not replacing a fund. It's not replacing debt capital. It is an additional resource for people, exactly. And it's specifically available to the most people. This is the thing that's really exciting to me. When I was out there going to funds and trying to raise capital for my company like 5 years ago, there was a very narrow investment thesis that I didn't fit. In this way, the investment thesis can be broad and people can decide which project they're wanting to do. And you can get capital from all over the place, as opposed to only having 100, 150 funds everywhere that do this work. I think that's the most exciting to me because the access to capital. And also because I know, and I feel like this will out in 10 years, that these founders are going to make a ton of difference in the cannabis industry because they have the authentic voice to make sure that these brands and these plant-touching companies are much more successful as if they don't exist there, right? If they don't exist because they can't get capital, then that's the issue. Oh, yeah. So I think one of the things that I want to leave with all of you, there seems to be some kind of thought around, it's us against them, it's them against us, social equity against large MSOs, small companies against, M&A, all of that stuff. And I just want you to really understand, it's not that we want a revolution, we want a resolution. And that is more important. So the resolution could possibly be the DAO. I'll let you know in 3 years.
Thank you, everyone.